Callum, it's time to introduce you to your new crush.
Go on.
Canadian Club Lemon Crush.
Of course, the taste buds have been screaming for a change.
And Canadian Club Lemon Crush is listening, with its balance of lemony zest and the smooth taste of Canadian Club.
Right now, there are 2,500 six-packs to be won. Scan your can or enter online for a chance. And always drink responsibly.
Canadian Club Lemon Crush. This zesty refreshment is your new crush.
Inheritance in Australia. These sneaky hidden taxes that you didn't know about until right now. But even better, you know how to minimise or potentially avoid them completely. Hello and welcome back to another episode of SugarMamma's Fireplay, the podcast where we ignite your financial independence, fuel those early retirement goals and dreams, and help you build sustainable wealth. I am your host, financial planner, Canna Campbell, and today we're diving into a topic that can surprise, frustrate, and even shock a lot of Australian families. That is inheritance tax. Now, you might be thinking, hang on a second, back it up, Canna. There isn't actually any inheritance tax in Australia. Well, technically, you are spot on. So, formal inheritance tax was actually abolished back in, I think, 1979. But here's the twist. There are still taxes that can quickly and quietly eat into your inheritance, or the inheritance you're planning on passing on, particularly through superannuation death benefits, and of course, capital gains tax on inherited assets. And if you haven't been sort of planning ahead and thinking proactively, these taxes can actually cost you or your loved ones tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So instead of just focusing on the problem, as you know, I'm a solutions type of person, let's talk about exactly what these tax rules really mean in practice, why this topic is really trending right now, as people that are waking up to this and getting really quite concerned, but more importantly, the legal smart strategies that can actually help you keep more of your hard-earned legacy within your family or with your loved ones. So let's go through this together right now. So, do we have death duties in Australia? The short answer is no, but when superannuation passes to a non-dependent, like an adult child, the taxable portion of that super is often hit with a 17% tax, or technically 15% plus the 2% Medicare levy, depending on how it's paid. Now, this is now getting the nickname in Australia as inheritance tax, even though it's technically called superannuation death benefit tax. So, if you're planning on leaving your super to a spouse or dependent children, you're fine. You do not need to worry about this. There's no problem at all because they are going to receive it still tax-free. But for adult children or people that you're not financially dependent on, or they're not financially dependent upon you, the ATO are going to take a slice of your legacy. So why is this a bit of a fuss? Because this rule has actually been in place for many, many years and no one's really cared about it. Okay, so the thing is, because it's attracted to superannuation, and previously superannuation wasn't really a big deal. It's not where a lot of people's wealth really sat. Fast forward today, superannuation balances are so much larger thanks to compulsory contributions and obviously increasing compulsory contributions. We're now sitting at 12% SG. Also, property values and share portfolios have soared. And thank goodness, financial literacy is improving. People now know what is sitting in their superannuation, what they're entitled to, and how to make it grow. Plus, on top of this, we also had some recent policy changes, like the proposed 30% tax on unrealized capital gains tax above $3 million in super. And of course, so these things in combination have put super back in the headlines. Now, go and combine that with one of the biggest intergenerational wealth transfers in Australian history as the baby boomers pass down assets. You've got a perfect recipe for bigger tax bills and bigger, nastier surprises. So how does this sort of fit in yours and my real life? Well, say you've built up $800,000 in your superannuation. When you pass, it goes to, say, your adult son or daughter. If $600,000 of that money within super is the taxable component, because you have sort of taxable and non-taxable within super, your adult child, could be facing a tax bill of, say, up to $102,000. That's money that actually could have gone to help pay your adult child's mortgage, help set up your grandchildren, or just give them more financial breathing space. But instead, that $100,000, call it, goes to the ATO. It's gone. It's literally flushed down the toilet when it actually could be avoided or at least reduced significantly. So how do we actually start reducing this tax bill or potential tax bill in a legal manner that doesn't get anyone into trouble? Well, there's actually quite a few different strategies, which I'm really glad to be sharing with you right now. So you can start thinking about this, do some research, and obviously head to your financial planner's office armed with this information and get something put in place sooner rather than later. So, all right, let's talk about the sort of key ones here. The first idea is to look at leaving super to tax dependent, so people who are financially dependent upon you. I'm talking just super here. So if you have, say, super and, say, an investment portfolio as well, you might want to consider leaving all of the super to your spouse or financially dependent children, and then leave perhaps your investments outside of super to those adult children to avoid this. Now, what some people choose to do, if that's the case where they don't have, they've got a bit of a mix of assets, they might have, say, more money in super and less money investments, or even vice versa. You can put a clause in your will to allow a bit of a rebalancing once the money has been paid to the financially dependent spouse, and then the adult children are actually accounted for. But what this does is it means the ATO can't go and take a slice of that superannuation money through the super death benefit tax because it's gone to a financially dependent. The remaining assets that are outside of super, the ATO have no say, of course, unless the asset is actually then gone and sold. So that's a great strategy immediately. Another idea is to direct your super to your estate. Now, this isn't the best strategy, but it definitely does have some savings, because if your superannuation is paid to your estate rather than to adult children, the tax rate at least drops from 17% to 15% because trusts don't actually pay the Medicare levy, so you completely avoid that, saving 2%. So it's better than nothing at all, but it's good to know this as an option for some people. Now, once that money is in your estate, it can then be distributed however you wish, and obviously your trustee will help organize that. And you can put your requests or preferences obviously in your will. Another idea, which I would say is the most popular idea and I think the most effective idea, is called a washing out strategy. Now, this is where you can withdraw some of your superannuation and then recontribute it back in. It's definitely powerful, and it's probably a really overlooked strategy because you actually start to change and reduce the amount of taxable money that the ATO would be going after and shifting it and moving it, almost recycling it back into like non-taxable money. So it's almost like a kind of similar to a debt recycling strategy where you're, I guess, and that's why I call it, it's a washing out strategy. So because it's the most powerful one, I actually want to talk you through an exercise right now because this is, I think, the most handy one to know about. So say you're over age 60, you've finished up work and you've got, say, $600,000 in super, and 80% of that is taxable, so $480,000. And then the remaining 20% is the tax-free component that the ATO won't ever be able to go after. You could, if you wanted to, withdraw, say, $200,000 as a lump sum And because you're over age 60, under current legislation, at the time of this podcast, it's tax-free to you personally. You would then go and recontribute it back into your superannuation, but this time as a non-concessional after-tax contribution. So it literally $200,000 comes out tax-free, and then you put it back in this time as a non-concessional contribution, which is an after-tax contribution. So now you've got a completely different balance. You've actually got $320,000 now as a tax-free component, whereas previously you had $480,000 as a taxable component. This is significant because you've basically made $200,000, taken it away from the ATO coming after it. So you've washed out $200,000 of the tax component, which means your adult children inherit. There's $200,000 that will be, less exposed to that, 17% death benefit tax. And in fact, if you wanted to, depending on, your situation, and of course you get advice around this, but you potentially could pull out a lot more than that if you want, and try and make as much of that as possible now tax-free through this washing out, withdrawal and recontribution strategy. Now, it's a little bit different, and this is why it's so important that you get advice, because the advice comes with pros and cons, it's complex, and there are lots of consequences. But even in this example alone of, withdrawing $200 and putting it back in, the potential savings is up to $34,000. So you can see why I think this is a really powerful strategy and really seriously needs to be considered under the guidance of professional advice. However, I should also point out it's a little bit different if you're under age 60, because you have access to your super, depending on whether you've met the conditions of release, but the withdrawal, that $200,000, could be partially taxable. So it's essential that you get advice before making these actions. But when you understand what the potential tax would be incurred by withdrawing it, and then look at, okay, well, yes, it might cost me, say, $8,000 in tax, but I'm going to be saving my children $80,000 of the tax, in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, it actually may be worthwhile doing this, which is why I stress the importance of advice. But obviously for people over age 60, it's a lot more straightforward, and it's even more effective as an estate planning tool.
Callum, it's time to introduce you to your new crush.
Go on.
Canadian Club Lemon Crush.
Of course, the taste buds have been screaming for a change.
And Canadian Club Lemon Crush is listening, with its balance of lemony zest and the smooth taste of Canadian Club.
Right now, there are 2,500 six-packs to be won. Scan your can or enter online for a chance. And always drink responsibly.
Canadian Club Lemon Crush. This zesty refreshment is your new crush.
Now, another strategy is, again, I think this is one that people are doing without considering, the washing strategy, and it's where they're, I think, almost having a bit of a irrational reaction, and they're pulling, as they learn about inheritance tax and the effect of it, they're just panicking and just pulling all of their money outside of super in its entirety. And then they're taking that money, they're putting it in cash, savings, or they're going and investing it outside of super. So technically they are avoiding the death benefit tax altogether. But what I am worried about this is it has its risks. First of all, you are losing out on all of those tax concessions, particularly if you're over age 60 and you're drawing, a tax-free allocated pension income every single year. I mean, your tax rate drops to 0% with money in super. The other risk, and I was actually reading about a situation like this only yesterday, where someone withdrew all their money out of super because they thought they were sick and dying, and they thought, it's fine, I'll pull it all out of super, but they actually outlived their money. So because they pulled it out of a concessionally taxed environment, that money didn't last as long. All those tax savings, which would have given them that additional longevity, was no longer there. And they actually ate into all of their money that they pulled out of super before their death. And it meant that they had to go on the age pension, which we all know is absolutely a miserable existence for so many people. So there are a lot of concerns to be, with this. And it's not a black and white world. You can actually look at doing a mixture of these different things where perhaps you do a withdrawal recontribution strategy, but you also maybe look at keeping some money out of superannuation depending on how much you've got, particularly if you're approaching that $3 million threshold, if that proposal comes through. So you can really sort of have the best of both worlds and I guess keep your fingers in a lot of different pies and sort of cover yourself depending on how laws and taxes and rules and loopholes and contribution limits, change over time. Another idea, and again, this is probably more of one for someone who's got, I guess, greater financial freedom and independence than others, but if you're age 60 and retired and you want to start pulling money out of super, some people are actually finding they just want to go and spend it, or they actually want to start giving it to their family members. So they are, avoiding that tax, withdrawing it tax-free if they're over age 60, and they're actually giving their children an early inheritance. Now, this is something I've seen more and more of, where people are starting to think, you know what, I'm watching our children and our grandchildren struggling financially, struggling to get a foot on the property ladder, or struggling with student debt or the rising cost of living. And they, instead of waiting for them to pass over to be able to give them money, they want to actually see their grandchildren and their adult children actually enjoy their inheritance a little bit earlier. And there are ways of doing this in a very clever way, and that's like using, for example, a family trust, and you can have a bit more control as to how that money is distributed, whether it be a lump sum or whether it's paid to them over a period of time, or whether it's potentially money that's invested on their behalf and you create an investment portfolio that pays them a passive income stream. But this is definitely another strategy that is really worth considering for so many people who are worried about this inheritance tax and just simply don't want their money taken away from them by the ATO. So the fine print, you really got to look into the fine print. And again, this is why we need to be aware. We need to think proactively. We need to plan ahead. These strategies always come with rules. They come with benefits. They come with the downsides. They also come with caps as to how much money you can put back into super and how much you can take out, and of course the potential tax that's triggered if you're under age 60. And you also need to understand that obviously there are consequences and it is complicated. So that is why you've got to go and get professional advice, and that is a non-negotiable, absolute essential. So at the end of the day, you or your loved ones have worked incredibly hard to build your wealth or their wealth. This is the last thing you want, is for the ATO to come and take a chunk simply because no one warned you, or you couldn't be bothered to do something about this little known inheritance tax. Even though it's not an inheritance tax, let's be honest, it's a form of an inheritance tax. But it is one that is actually avoidable to a certain degree. And by you now understanding the rules and having the right conversations today, now that you know a few different strategies to effectively reduce and avoid it, you can go and get that professional advice. You can actually ensure that your legacy stays exactly where you want it to, or your loved one's legacy stays exactly where they want it. And it's in the hands of the people that you really love, and you want that money to actually help benefit them, or vice versa. So if you know somebody who's planning to leave wealth through their super, or someone who may inherit some money through someone's super, can you please make sure that you send them this episode? You could actually be saving them tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you're giving them the knowledge. You're giving them the time and the opportunity to do something about it before this tax is actually triggered, and there's no going back. You can't go back and retrospectively fix it. It's done. You have to just cop that tax. So you can actually stop this from happening by sending them this episode and telling them, please make sure you listen to it. The money, the savings, is most definitely worth your time. Now, in the meantime, thank you everyone for listening to this episode on SugarMamma's Fireplay. It is always an absolute honour to be able to connect with you every single Monday morning and be a part of you starting your week off on an empowered, informed note. And remember, your money is here to serve you, never to stress you out. Keep it in your family, keep it with your loved ones, and keep your money working for you And of course, as always, keep that financial fire burning bright within. This is SugarMamma's Fireplay.
Sam, it's time for me to introduce you to your new crush.
Go on.
Canadian Club Lemon Crush.
Of course, the taste buds have been screaming for a change.
And Canadian Club Lemon Crush is listening, with its balance of lemony zest and the smooth taste of Canadian Club.
Right now, there are 2,500 six-packs to be won. Scan your can or enter online for a chance, and always drink responsibly.
Canadian Club Lemon Crush. This zesty refreshment is your new crush.